Hi, my name is Casey Kirkendall, and this will be the media critique portion of my final portfolio for the class Teach 330 Multicultural Education. So the piece of media that I've chosen to critique is a movie from 1988 called Mississippi Burning. And this is a very powerful movie, especially at the time when it came out. The civil rights movement was a lot more fresh at the time, and so a lot of people still had that in the back of their minds as they were going to go watch this in the theaters. And this deals with two basic forms of oppression, being race primarily and also religion. So this happens in a small town of Mississippi, and basically the plot line of the movie is there's three civil rights workers, two whites and one African American, and they are pulled over in the middle of the night by a whole string of police cars that had obviously singled these guys out. They weren't doing anything wrong, and so they pull them over. The kids are scared. They're obviously scared of the cop, especially the Negro with them, and it comes to the point where they feel terrified for their lives. The cops are questioning them, threatening them, and the police end up actually murdering these three and dumping their bodies in a swamp. Okay, so as the movie goes on, the Federal Bureau of Investigation sends down a team of agents to find out what happened to these civil rights workers, because at this time there was equality in America legally, according to the Constitution and the acts passed at the time around 1966. And so they obviously want to know what happened to these civil rights workers. They suspect foul play. So they send down these workers, and these agents, what they find is that this community is still very, very oppressive. They are singling out blacks and Jews primarily, and they are torching their homes, obviously killing them. And there's even a scene where they blow up a church full of African American churchgoers in it and light it on fire. And so they really have no kind of care for the law at all, not caring what the government's telling them to do, still living in the old way of oppression. And so these FBI agents, as they travel around the town to find out what happened, what they find is that nobody really wants to help them because they are scared of the police, obviously, and they fear for their own lives, what may happen to them if they decide to help the agents. And even it goes as far as like the wives of the policemen, even have so much hate in the beauty parlors and at the grocery store. You see the wives bickering, obviously the white wives being very oppressive and negative to the African American women in the grocery store and the beauty salons. So I mean the oppression is everywhere from the dominant culture down there. And so long story short, they do end up finding the boys in the swamp, and they do finally give justice to the police department down there, and the town's completely taken over by the army, and it's completely new town government, new police chief, everybody's brought in, and the movie does have a happy ending, I suppose, that they do finally get the old regime of power out of this town, or whatever you would like to call that. And so one way that I'd really like to connect this to class is through the Angry Eye the Eye color video that we watched, just because these people had no reason to be oppressed on. They had no reason to feel judged, but they were brought into this room and immediately, based on one simple physical trait that they had no control over, were immediately judged and subject to all kinds of abuse, verbal and physical and everything else, and they had nothing to do. And even the one girl I remember from the video that stood up and said, "You can't do this, you can't treat me like this," the instructor of the class just completely dialed in on her and went all out and verbally just destroyed this girl. And her classmates were scared to help her because they didn't want the same thing to happen to them. And I think a lot of this is exactly what happened in this time period that we're looking at, is people knew this wasn't right, but they weren't going to say anything because they wanted to protect themselves. They wanted to protect their family. They wanted to protect everything that they've ever worked for. And so I think that's a really good connection to use, a really good example, obviously in a less harsh situation, more to use as an eye-opener, that lesson was. And it's really crazy to see how scared they were for their lives to stand up for each other. And that's why it took so long for these movements to be passed and for these bills and laws to go into effect, is because people were scared. They were scared for their lives. And I really, before taking this class, I had no idea how much of this could still even go on today. Maybe not in the form of murder and, setting buildings on fire and property damage, but I do think there still is racism today, and that is something I was not aware of. And so I think we need to continue to use the media to celebrate diversity and celebrate culture, and realize that we are so far past as a society, as a human population, of any kind of oppression. And I really think that we could use the media more positively to convey that to the general public.